Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on where this finds you. And a warm welcome to all to this webinar on the state of nuclear arms control and the implications for the upcoming NPT review conference. This event is a part of a series of NPT-related events hosted by UNIDIR in collaboration with United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs that we are organizing in the lead up to the 2026 NPT review conference. This series aims to enhance understanding of key issues and deepen engagement with the NPT review process as we head towards the review conference next year. Just to note, this event is being recorded and it should be made available through UNIDIR's YouTube channel in due course, which I hope is useful. And I know there are several parallel events and activities underway, as is often the case. Previous events we had on lessons learned with President-designate Ambassador Yet, Ambassadors Lavinin, Gauhar Mukhajanova, and Chris King is already available on our YouTube channel and on the website, so you are welcome to watch or rewatch it there. So today's event will focus on the future of nuclear arms control and what it means for 2026 NPT review conference, but also NPT more broadly. And we will hear from our panel shortly with some questions to kick off the discussion, after which we'll be opening the floor to questions for all of you. To ask the question, please use Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of the screens. And your questions and comments will be treated as anonymous, but if you want to be identified, please include your name and affiliation in the text box. Before we turn out to our panel, I'm delighted to give the screen to our retired Ambassador Jarmo Viinanen. Ambassador Viinanen was for a long time Finland's arms control ambassador and the chair of the first session of the preparatory committee to the 2026 NPT review conference, and we are honored to hear his remarks today. Screen is your ambassador.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, I would like to start by thanking Andrei and UNIDIR for organizing this topical webinar on NPT and nuclear arms control. I am honored to say a couple of words before we hear from our first-class experts on arms control and nuclear weapons. Bear with me, I try to be brief. Every government shares one overriding priority: to prevent the nation being drawn into a war. To achieve this, states pursue a wide range of foreign and security policies designed to safeguard national interest, maintain stability, and reduce the risk of conflict. When it comes to nuclear weapons, the stakes are even higher. Nuclear weapon states and nuclear possessors have acquired and maintained their nuclear arsenals for perceived security reasons, yet they also recognize the catastrophic consequences of nuclear exchange and want to avoid nuclear war. Avoiding nuclear war is not just a priority, it is an existential imperative for both non-nuclear weapon states and nuclear weapon states alike. Arms control has been an important means to reduce the likelihood of nuclear war. For more than 6 decades, the two largest nuclear powers, the United States and Russia, have engaged in arms control aimed at reducing the risk of nuclear war and limiting its potential consequences. Arms control is not only about weapons, but about reducing risk and managing risks, building confidence, and creating transparency. Indeed, many agreements between Washington and Moscow have focused not just on nuclear arsenals, but on conventional forces, risk reduction, war prevention, and crisis management. Other nuclear weapon states have participated in some arrangements, but largely allowed the two largest possessors to carry the burden of formal arms control. These efforts have produced tangible results: elimination of certain categories of weapons, bans, reductions, restrictions, and transparency. Collectively, they have enhanced the security of participating states and indirectly the broader international community. Yet arms control has always been criticized within the NPT framework for resting on the assumption that nuclear deterrence work, a premise many states reject as false. This brings us to a central question: does arms control advance nuclear disarmament? The Non-Proliferation Treaty itself does not explicitly mention arms control, but refers to nuclear disarmament in its preamble and especially in Article 6. The International Court of Justice's 1996 advisory opinion of nuclear disarmament and the NPT made clear that states have a legal obligation to pursue and conclude negotiations on nuclear disarmament in good faith under strict and effective international control. This legal obligation has been reaffirmed and strengthened by numerous NPT outcome documents. The obligation applies to all states bodies, but the primary burden rests with the nuclear states. Have they lived up to this obligation? The majority of NPT members would answer unequivocally no. While some states bodies point to earlier reductions, tense international relations, and the need for gradual approach, the overwhelming view remains that progress in nuclear disarmament is insufficient, accountability is lacking, and divisions are deepening. Arms control undeniably impacts the NPT. Advances in arms control in broad terms can provide nuclear weapon states with a stronger basis to argue for gradual disarmament, foster shared interest, and even improve the international security. Conversely, stagnation or regression in arms control would worsen tensions within the NPT review process, complicating negotiations and undermining trust, and in the end, probably the credibility of the whole treaty. As we look ahead to the next NPT review conference, we must acknowledge the sobering reality where we live. International tensions are running high, the New START Treaty is not being implemented, the rules-based international order is under strain, and powerful nations appear to increasingly inclined to pursue spheres of influence rather than collective security. In this environment, arms control and disarmament are not luxuries, they are necessities. They are not merely outcomes of improved international relations, they are instruments that can shape and improve the global security landscape. I'm very much looking forward for today's presentations and deliberations. I am confident that today's presenters will address current arms control dynamics with clarity, and I hope that this will provide us with some ideas on how to address disarmament during the NPT review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jarmo, for setting the scene and putting arms control in the NPT context. As you say, arms control is not in the treaty text, but it's deeply intertwined with the NPT review process. So it is very important to what is going to happen in April and May next year. I'm delighted now to introduce Alexander Bell, who is the president and CEO of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Alex had a distinguished career, both in the think tank community and in the US government, where her last position was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Affairs in the Bureau of Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability at the US State Department. Thank you for joining us, Alex, and hoping you could describe how the current and future state of arms control is seen in Washington, D.C., and what will it mean for the 2026 REFCON. Alex, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you, and thanks to UNIDIR for having me here today. In terms of the current state and near future prospects of nuclear arms control architecture, things are bleak. To be honest, though, when putting thoughts together for this, I was reminded that I've really been asked to talk about the future of arms control basically for the last decade. And in some ways, this isn't a matter of trying to predict where we're going, but really thinking about how the future is going to be shaped about, in terms of what's happening now. Not assuming there's some sort of clean slate situation where everything happening in the political environment, security environment, doesn't have a direct bearing on where we can go. And what we are doing now, for lack of a more sophisticated term, is just stupid. We're letting the structures and agreements we painstakingly built over decades crumble or dissolve before us. We're actively avoiding the conversations we really need to have. We're saying that we're supportive of arms control measures, but not really being there to create the pressure when necessary for fear of upsetting a broader political relationship that we may have. We're watching countries muse openly about getting nuclear weapons. It's really hard to think of a better word than just stupid for what's going on. So where do we go? We really need to ask ourselves, are we going to use the set of tools that collectively make up the concept of arms control to create stability, predictability, and prevent possible catastrophe or not? If the answer is yes, then arms control absolutely has a future. If the answer is no, no, we will not avail ourselves of the very tools that have brought us back from the nuclear brink time and again, then arms control doesn't have a future, and we may not either. We're quickly approaching the expiration of New START in February 2026. It's really hard to believe that we've spent the last half century ensuring there is stability between the two largest nuclear arsenals in the world, that of the United States and Russia. And now we seem to be abandoning that half century worth of work. Fortunately, the recently released U.S. national security strategy did affirm the U.S. desire to preserve strategic stability with Russia. The devil, of course, is as always in the details. I think the whole world is watching to see how the Trump administration responds to the offer from President Putin to extend the central limits of New START for 1 year. That offers a good start. It is not good enough, though. I think it should be countered with yes to the extension of central limits, but also a demand to have the restoration of data exchanges between the United States and Russia, and at least potentially some inspections before the expiration of New START, and then the immediate commencement of a sustained dialogue between Washington and Moscow about what comes next in the process of strategic stability between them. That there really is no excuse for not being at the table talking all the time, every day, about how we maintain strategic stability between the United States and Russia. The action or lack thereof, of course, is going to affect the upcoming NPT RevCon. I will be blunt. I think this is going to be a difficult RevCon. I don't think anybody thinking about the RevCon would probably disagree with that. Many in the nuclear policy community now say we're at the start of a third nuclear age, the first age running from July 45 to roughly 1991, marked by discovery, nuclear proliferation and buildups, and the near daily fear of nuclear war. The second age running until now, marked by massive arms reductions, two distinct proliferation challenges from North Korea and Iran, and the fear of nuclear terrorism. This third age, some are very quick to predict, will be marked by an arms buildup, hastened by a burgeoning arms race, driven by the off-referenced and poorly defined great power competition. One could posit that it is a bit premature, if not cavalier, to predict how an entire age will unfold. That said, it is impossible to argue that the trajectory is unchanged, that nuclear threats are not on the rise. The real question is what future do we want to choose? In some ways, that requires figuring out what went wrong, particularly on the major topic at the RevCon that is sure to come up, and that's the lack of progress on disarmament. The questions being, why did the post-Cold War push for a world without nuclear weapons fail? Was it a lack of political will or urgency, resistance from those with vested interests in the status quo, or a disbelief in the idea that the goal was achievable? Is it possible to better frame the pursuit of nuclear disarmament, not as an unachievable fantasy, but as a legitimate security proposal? Is a world without nuclear weapons a safer world, or is it one where we have simply replaced nuclear weapons with different but equally dangerous weapons? How will global security be managed in a world without nuclear weapons? And what will disincentivize conventional war in the absence of nuclear deterrence? Can we ensure, upon reaching zero, that the state of disarmament is irreversible? Some of these questions are being debated, but not by nearly enough people, and honestly, from too few perspectives. Many disarmament structures created with the best intent long ago ceased to function. Many of these structures, including the Conference on Disarmament, were created through 3 UN special sessions on disarmament held from the late 1970s to the late 1980s. Some observers have posited that after more than 30 years, it's time for another such session to adapt and repurpose what was built. There's resistance to such an effort, with many experts positing that there's no chance of improving conditions in the international discourse on nuclear threats and a high likelihood of making things worse. At the same time, the fear of failure, fear of losing what was built before, could be our undoing. Will it take time and likely inordinate amount of patience to build a new global consensus? The reality is that the only true way to prevent nuclear war is to prevent nuclear weapons once and for all. We've simply lost the path on how to get there, or even a consensus that that's where we need to go. Of course, there's no shortcut to a world without nuclear weapons, and no grand bargain on nuclear disarmament in the offing. Nor is there some magical, elegant solution that will make this RevCon go smoothly. The academics, experts, policymakers, the delegates at the RevCon will need to think about non-proliferation, arms control, deterrence, and disarmament, and how those issues will work in a new nuclear age. They'll need to understand how existential risk, climate change, emerging disruptive technologies, including artificial intelligence, will affect this work for good and for bad. They'll need to push against you all, anyone working on the NPT will need to push against status quo thinking, given that it's exactly the kind of thinking that got us here. We have to accept that progress is only going to be achieved through plotting, frustrating, and iterative steps underpinned by scientific endeavor and sustained political will, some of which can easily be controlled and some of which cannot. So in specific terms, my advice for the RevCon is simple. Choose success. That might mean changing how we think about success. In the past, consensus document has been the way that we assess whether or not a review conference has gone well, a cycle has gone well. But that's not written into the treaty. We invented that as a measure of success. We can choose to measure success differently. We can account for the things that we know will be points of debate, points where we likely cannot get consensus. And we can choose to orient the focus of whether or not countries coming to New York are reiterating their commitments to the core principles of the NPT, and assess that commitment on its own. I know it's easier said than done, of course, especially because I won't be there anymore. So very easy for me to posit, but I would say that we cannot afford to lose the NPT, and it's much easier to wreck things than it is to build them back up. The NPT is worth preserving, and I would say that that is what would make it the duty and the mission of every delegate there, to make sure that this RevCon is about everyone committing to the central core tenets of the treaty and everyone figuring out where we go next, and committing to the work, not just showing up in a room every 5 years and saying this, but actually committing day to day on what we can do to strengthen the treaty, what pressure we can bring to bear to stem possible proliferation, to roll back possible proliferation programs, to get the nuclear weapon states back to the negotiating table, either on bilateral or multilateral levels, to make sure that civil nuclear technology is spreading around the world in a safe and safeguarded way. That's what should be on everyone's mind. And quite frankly, we cause these problems. We are capable of solving them. Again, we just have to choose to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for flagging that the fear of failure could be our undoing, but also reminding us to choose success. I think that's a great, starting point for the 2026 RevCon, but also for flagging there is a need for sustained dialogue between Washington and Moscow, and this leads us neatly to our next speaker. I would now like to introduce our second panelist, Anton Klopkov. Anton is director of the Moscow-based Center for Energy Security Studies, a member of the UN Secretary-General Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters, and the chairman of the Moscow Non-Proliferation Conference. He has worked extensively on a range of WMD issues and has long-standing experience with the NPT-related matters. Anton, thanks for joining us, and apologies, it's already getting late in Moscow. It's always hard to gather people across the time zones. So can you describe for us how the current and future state of arms control is seen from Moscow, and what will it mean for the 2026 RevCon? The screen is yours.
Thank you, Andrei, and thanks to UNIDIR for inviting me. It's a pleasure to join another very important and timely UNIDIR event, and looking forward to see UNIDIR team in person in Geneva next month. The title of the webinar is The Nuclear Arms Control at Crossroads, Implications for the NPT, and 3 questions were posed to all of the speakers. So I will try to be brief on the first 2 questions, and I found myself in agreement with Alex, especially on the first question, where we are, and spend most of my time to share my view on the very last question, what the current situation in arms control mean for the upcoming NPT review conference, and I would add what should be done in this context. First, where we are, I think Alex was quite diplomatic to say that the things are bleak. I think we should be realistic where we are, and also the title of our session is very diplomatic. I think we were at the crossroads a few times during the last 20 plus years. And unfortunately, in most of cases, the wrong turn was taken. Now we are at the point of almost complete dismantlement of arms control architecture because of the decisions which were made at those crossroads in the past. This is first. Second, I don't think that the world will change a lot the day after the new START will expire in February. It will be as dangerous as it will be at the end of January, for example, with a high risk, unfortunately, of direct military confrontation between the nuclear weapon states. But in a long-term perspective, if the arms control vacuum continues, it will bring very negative consequences and will bring additional nuclear risks. So now I would like to focus on the third question, what all it means for the NPT Rev conference next year, and what should be done in this context. And I have 10 points to share. First, the logic of the operation of the NPT member states at the NPT RevCon should be do no further harm. The NPT is already under the severe strain, not only, and I would say probably not so much because of the Article 6. There are so many other sources of pressure on the treaty, and just mention a few recent ones: declared plans to resume nuclear tests by some of the nuclear 5 states, attacks on safeguarded nuclear facilities, misinterpretation of the text of the NPT, Article 4, that guarantees all member states the right to develop and use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Point number 2, the expectations regarding the upcoming NPT not overambitious and adequate to the current geopolitical realities when it comes to the conference in general, and how the Article 6 issues would be covered in the draft final document. And it does not mean that we should not try to have the final document. But I do believe we should try to have it very short to have better chances for adoption. Third, all states, nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, should stay focused on the NPT issues at the NPT review conference and to avoid politicization. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to agree on anything during the upcoming meeting. Fourth,
Did we lose Anton?
looks like
you disconnected for a second. Yeah, continue, please.
Yeah, apologies for that. And the first topic I have in mind, CTBT and nuclear test moratoria. And what is about commitments from all nuclear N5 states in their national statements that they will not be the first to resume nuclear tests. I would like to remind that the next year it will be the 30th anniversary of the CTBT opening for signature. Five, I think it is important to try to build on the past arms control agreement experience, including on the most recent one. And here already the Russia's initiative to extend the central limits of the New START treaty was mentioned by Alex. And I think this initiative is a good basis to try to at least to preserve some elements of the New START treaty. And what is important for Tango, for dialogue, at least two are needed. And again, from that point of view, my personal concern that it's difficult to find a partner in the US nowadays, in the US administration nowadays, because as I understand, still there are so many vacancies. I hope I'm wrong, and some names will be mentioned to whom in the State Department, for example, those issues could be discussed. Next, this is point number 6, strategic stability dialogue between the two major nuclear powers has to be resumed as a next step after extension of the New START central limits. And I think it would be good if two major nuclear weapon states agree on this before the NPT review conference. Point number 7, on the eve of the NPT REFCON, the N5 states should reaffirm at the highest possible political level that the nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Point number 8, at the NPT REFCON, nuclear weapon states should reaffirm their support of the objectives of the treaty and Article 6 commitments as part of their national statements. Of course, in the perfect environment, I personally would prefer to have a joint N5 statement on related matters, as it was the case in the past, but as of now, it does not look as a realistic option. Point number 9, N5 engagement with non-nuclear weapon states should be strengthened. And as an option, N5 could organize a briefing about the N5 process for non-nuclear weapon states and non-governmental organizations during the NPT review conference. And such a meeting could be hosted either by all N5 countries or by the previous and current chairs. And another alternative here, N5 states could have a side event at the REF conference on a joint side event on their nuclear doctrines. And the very last 10th point, at the time, and this is about importance of the dialogue, which already been mentioned by Alex, at the time when most of official channels for regular dialogue at least among N5 states, are closed or suspended. Track 2 or Track 1.5 formats can and should play a special role, and nuclear weapon states should support such a dialogue, not to block it. And non-nuclear weapon states could provide their support for such dialogue if necessary. And I will stop here.
Thank you, Anton, for this really helpful and very ambitious list of proposals. I think if the N5 would do even half of what you proposed, that already would be a substantial support for the NPT review conference. If you have questions to Alex or Anton, please do submit those using the Q&A function. We already started getting the first one, but feel free to join. And before we go to the Q&A, I would like to welcome Tun Zhao, who is Senior Fellow at the Nuclear Policy Program in Carnegie, China, at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Tom has a lot of experience following China's approaches to nuclear arms control and global nuclear order. So it would be great if you could describe for us how the current and future state of arms control is seen from Beijing and what it will mean for the 2026 RevCon. Tom, please, the screen is yours.
Well, thank you, Andre, and hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. And of course, I will only speaking as an independent researcher and not representing any government. Looking at the future prospect of arms control, and especially in the Chinese case, I think there are a few interesting data points. The ruling party's guideline for China's 15th five-year plan includes a commitment to strengthening and enlarging China's strategic deterrent capabilities. And during China's military parade in September, China, for the first time, showcased its nuclear triad capability with a number of new strategic missile systems revealed, including JL-3, DF-61, silo-based ICBM. There is also a hint, according to the interpretation of observers, about China's new operational capability of conducting launch and warning. At the same time, I think from China's perspective, the international environment may be moving to some potentially positive direction in the sense that US President Trump is less interested in ideological confrontation. The new US national security strategy really emphasizes non-intervention as a principle. The current Trump administration appears more willing to accommodate Chinese core interests, including over the Taiwan issue. There is some argument that China's recent nuclear buildup is very importantly driven by a desire to use nuclear weapons to achieve strategic counterbalance, to create a more favorable international environment for China. If that's the case, then the perceived somewhat positive development in the international environment may mean, I speculate as a scholar, that there might be less need for China to accelerate its nuclear expansion. But of course, this is a researcher's speculation. But Chinese government does provide a very important white paper recently on China's arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation policy, which includes a very general explanation about China's build-up. It says China needs its nuclear weapons to safeguard its strategic national security and global strategic stability, which I think reflects no sense of urgency in Beijing to be more transparent, to better explain the rationale behind its nuclear policy change, and or to better explain its future goals of nuclear capability development. Rather, China sees its nuclear modernization as contributing to global strategic stability, and China's overall military development is viewed as a part of peaceful forces in the world. Even though I personally think it would be in China's interest to join Russia in any future nuclear arms control discussion with the United States, because China can benefit from Russia's shared view on those strategic security issues. China can benefit from Russia's much richer experience and expertise in nuclear arms control negotiation and verification. But China appeared to have made a rather high-level decision a few years ago against the specific format of US, Russia, China trilateral nuclear arms control. But it doesn't mean that we couldn't explore other types of nuclear talks with China, including a potential China-UK-France trilateral discussion on nuclear issues. They are all nuclear powers with hundreds of nuclear weapons. They all express a view that they support minimum nuclear deterrence, and they can certainly have a trilateral discussion on what that means in today's international security environment. I think President Trump, his leadership may make some difference influencing China's calculations. So far, President Trump's support for the peace through strength approach is not working. If anything, it is making China more confident because China is very confident about its own capability, about its own peace through strength strategy, because China can build strategic military hardware at much cheaper price and at much faster speed with much greater efficiency. But President Trump's emphasis on leadership diplomacy on nuclear issue may still prove to be the most hopeful approach to engage China. Last time, when China agreed to a specific nuclear confidence building measure about not having AI make nuclear weapon launch decisions, was made in the run-up to the Biden-Xi summit meeting. So China usually likes to be more active in considering cooperative security measures to create the favorable atmosphere for important political summits. And in 2026, as we know now, there may be 4 opportunities of in-person meetings between President Trump and President Xi. So there are many opportunities to consider limited but still meaningful risk reduction or confidence building measures that China can support. Many topical nuclear weapon issues that we are discussing in recent weeks would be hard to make a near-term progress, such as the badly need transparency over a nuclear testing site. It's related to President Trump's declared interest in resuming nuclear testing on an equal basis with Russia and China. Personally, I think that topic would be very hard to make a near-term progress, given the fact that it might require sharing of very sensitive military information. And I think China would certainly welcome a New START extension because any potential US uploading of nuclear warheads following New START's termination would be primarily aiming at China. But China likely thinks it has very little influence over US decision on that issue. If President Trump insists on talking about nuclear issues with other world leaders, I think the best realistic progress on official and broad-based engagement with China in the arms control area is to start a strategic security dialogue, including a dialogue that can include nuclear issues. Some Chinese strategists have speculated about the possibility of the United States under President Trump showing greater respect to China's core interests, including making more concessions on the Taiwan issue. And if that's the case, some people think it is possible that in return, maybe a broad strategic security dialogue could be possible. Of course, that reflects scholars' perspective and not necessarily the government's view. Regarding the implications for the REVCON, of course, the stalemate on arms control process, or to be more precise, the backward development on arms control issues would be a greater challenge for this REVCON than last time, given the developments in the last 4 years. I think debates about greater nuclear transparency were already very hard last time. And this time, I think it would be even harder for the nuclear weapon states to even consider benchmarks or timelines for nuclear disarmament or reduction. The Trump-Xi personal summit meetings, the earliest may happen in May, which means it may be a little late for the REVCON, but usually the preparation work starts before the actual summit meeting. So there are still some near-term opportunities to create the right atmosphere and to entertain arms control or transparency proposals. I think the two sides, US and China, could certainly jointly reaffirm their commitment to no explosive nuclear testing. We don't know if China shares the American definition of zero yield under CTBT, which means the US-China disputes over very low yield supercritical testing will probably continue, but they can certainly agree to no full-on explosive nuclear testing. The US national security strategy stresses the concept of restoring a strategic stability framework with Russia. It doesn't say about China, but recent statements from President Trump, from Peter Hegseth, indicate that US may be similarly interested in discussing a more strategically stable relationship with China. I think Russia would love to engage with the United States after Ukraine war is resolved in one way or another, which would give the Russians less political incentive to disengage on strategic stability discussion. And in Russia-China bilateral statements, they have both stressed the importance of maintaining global strategic stability. And in the Chinese case, even though the military still appears very hesitant to discussing strategic stability, but this topic appear to still viewed relatively favorably by many civilian Chinese experts and maybe even by some political leadership. So I think it is possible that strategic stability can become an acceptable framework to manage major power security relations going forward. And moreover, when you look at the strategic capabilities among the major powers, they are becoming less asymmetric. This is true for the nuclear offensive capabilities. This is also true for strategic defensive capabilities, including missile defense. In the Chinese case, for example, China showcased its HQ-29, a missile defense system that can counter long-range ballistic missiles. So at least in theory, it makes sense for the three nuclear major powers or for N5 to start thinking about including strategic defensive capabilities in bilateral, trilateral, or multilateral engagements. This wouldn't necessarily mean immediate negotiation on limiting such capabilities, but to have such a discussion, a more inclusive discussion, would move things in a less confrontational direction. Last point, I think one way to encourage China to be a little more active on arms control issues is for the international community, for members of the NPT, to more constructively respond to China's proposal on no first use. And of course, no first use can help advance China's image of a responsible nuclear power, but it also reflects some genuine belief in Beijing in the usefulness of no first use in reducing the salience of nuclear weapons. So the right approach, I think, is for members of NPT to ask the right questions, including how to prohibit not only the actual first use of nuclear weapons, but the threat of first use of nuclear weapons. How do we distinguish during a military crisis an actual nuclear use from a nuclear demonstration shot or a nuclear test that might destroy satellites in outer space? And also, how do we address the conventional nuclear linkage behind no first use, given the fact that many American allies' opposition against US adoption of no first use is their concern that US no first use could embolden China's conventional level military aggression? So I think an expression of interest by NPT members, not necessarily to start negotiating no first use treaties, but to jointly explore these key issues underlying a credible no first use commitment would be a valuable effort to reduce salience of nuclear weapons. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for your presentation. And I really like how our panel is still optimistic, despite everything, and people see opportunities, at least for engagement. So I think this was a good choice of people to speak on those topics. So, having concluded the first round of remarks, I would like to turn to some questions. And great to see quite a number of them already in the chat. I think we can start with, there are like three questions which are, okay, let me start with the first questions, and then each of you can decide which one you want to address. So the first question comes from Claudio Leopoldino, who asks, despite continued doubts about the technical and economic viability of space-based BMD, concrete steps are being taken by the US to implement the Golden Dome initiative. What impact do you anticipate such steps might have in the NPT? And the second question is, I think, more broad one. What would useful informal arms control, transparency, and confidence building measures look like in the third nuclear age to mitigate growing nuclear risks? And 5 dialogue was mentioned. What about other things like open source verification, voluntarily stockpile data exchanges, launch test exercise notification, dialogues on related issues, and so on and so forth? So whoever wants to address any of those, and we can start in the same order. So Alex, please.
Yeah, I figured I was going to get a Golden Dome question. So American investment in missile defense, I think, has been a long-standing back and forth here about whether or not we can make ourselves invulnerable or as invulnerable as possible. But unfortunately, adversaries get a vote and the interrelationship between offense and defensive systems, as is outlined in the New START Treaty, is sort of inexorable. And in some ways it's surprising to see this push, given that President Putin already in his sort of Steve Jobs with nuclear weapons presentation back during the first Trump term showed that the Russians would invest in systems that could get around American missile defenses, understanding that missile defenses are not yet for strategic threats from the Russian Federation or China. It will be a debate. We are still waiting for actual information out of the Pentagon about the scale and scope of this project. I can assure you it won't be deployed in the next 3 years, despite the pronouncements of President Trump. I think this is going to be part of a real appropriations debate in Congress, as well as a policy debate in the broader public about how we manage this. I think, the Russians likely, and the Chinese as well, have concerns about this. And my response to that is, okay, get to the table and start talking about it formally. Talk about how the U.S. desire, as stated in the National Security Strategy, is at odds with a push to have a sort of a national missile defense program at the scale and scope of that we think Golden Dome might be. In terms of how it affects the NPT, I think U.S. investments in national missile defense will have an implication on our ability to do bilateral and multilateral arms control with Russia or China, and that would be reflected in sort of further lack of progress to stabilize and reduce nuclear threats between them. But the direct implications on the NPT, I think, are less so. We'll see how the U.S. cares to sort of answer the questions as a delegation about offense-defense interrelationship. But I think countries should ask the question. Particularly friends should be honest with each other and tell each other the truth. So if there are countries out there that think this might be deleterious to Article 6 efforts overall, they should say so.
Thanks, Alex.
I will say quickly on
Sorry.
the risk issue. Sorry, sort of risk reduction. My one thing is all of those things are good. I would just push back against the idea that it's informal arms control. Everything that we do to take steps to manage arsenals, but between ourselves, is arms control. We got pretty good for a while at doing legally binding treaties, but every component, whether it's launch notification agreements, transparency, confidence building, mill-to-mill exchanges, scientist-to-scientist exchanges, that's all arms control. And there's nothing informal about it. It's just, we got good at treaties for a while and we're not very good at them now. So we have to look at the full scope of tools that we can use.
Thank you, Alex. Anton, please.
Thanks. First of all, Andrei, I did not mean to be too optimistic, because I don't think we are in a bad shape when it comes to upcoming REFCON. And my idea was just to share a menu of possible options. And of course, it's up to the officials to choose. And I would like to, of course, emphasize that I do not represent the Russian government. I shared my personal views and observations. With regard to new technologies, it goes without saying that they brings new opportunities and new challenges. If new technologies will provide additional means of remote verification with no need for too much on-site inspections, I think it could be an added value in the future. But it should be also clear that new technologies sometimes bring some new challenges as well. And I hope that when and if the dialogue on strategic stability and related matters will be resumed in the bilateral Russia-US format or multilateral, and in this context, I would think, first of all, the N5 format, because from my perspective, France and UK must be engage on those issues, of course, as well. I think all of those issues, new technologies, how they would affect the strategic stability should be discussed as well. On the second question regarding the interrelations between offense and defense, Alex already referred to New START Treaty, where this issue is mentioned in the preamble, and these interrelations will stay with us, which means that if a new defense system is developed by the United States, I would assume that Russian military will think about countermeasures. And this is what happened when US withdrew from the ABM Treaty in 2002. So probably I will stop here. But where I agree with Alex on this issue, that it should be part of the equation when and if governmental officials are sitting together and are discussing those issues. Of course, both offensive and defensive arms should be discussed.
Thanks, Anton. Tunja, please.
Golden Dome, I think it can easily become a convenient talking point at the RevCon, but the real impact will need time to understand. Even in the Chinese case, Chinese experts are constantly monitoring the development and readjusting their assessments of how U.S. Golden Dome would actually materialize. There doesn't appear any desperation in the Chinese case to react immediately to Golden Dome. If anything, many Chinese experts actually think Golden Dome could either end up wasting a lot of US money and resources in a type of capability that don't directly enhance US strategic capability in the most cost-effective way, or they could help better inform China's own missile defense technological development. Let United States, do all the experiments and demonstrates what works and what doesn't. And given the fact that all the three major powers, perhaps maybe all the nuclear weapon states, will commit more to developing defensive capabilities, I think it's time that NPT members can push the nuclear weapon states to have more inclusive discussions, to include the discussion of strategic defensive capabilities. One way to do so, to deepen such discussion, is to define what constitutes global missile defense, global strategic missile defense. Because in the Russian and Chinese case, they express strong opposition against the global missile defense system. But what constitutes global missile defense compared with other types of missile defense? So there are still very useful operational level issues to be thought out. In terms of informal arms control, I very much supported, also because of my observation of Chinese experience, including China's recent effort to provide missile pre-launch notification in the case of its DF-31 intercontinental missile launch. Last year, China decided to provide some pre-launch notification to a selected number of countries. What is important is China still appears very hesitant to formalize any such commitment in a formal arms control agreement, let alone a treaty, because China prefers maintaining operational flexibility and even political flexibility. But still, I think this positive development, which is also emphasized in China's new white paper, demonstrates the need for greater international investments in broad efforts and projects and dialogues to build shared risk, shared nuclear risk. The reason I think China decided to provide missile pre-launch notification is because after years of international interaction and study and advocacy on this issue, China was brought on board about the value of providing pre-launch notification in reducing risk of misunderstanding. The importance of using or further enhancing such efforts, which would eventually lead to tacit norms of behavior. I think that's a very important way of mirroring the success in arms control.
Thank you, Tong. So we're getting more and more questions, so maybe I'll now group them in groups of 3, and then again, you don't have to answer every single one, just whatever is interesting or important for you. So the first question is, it seems that nuclear disarmament cannot advance as long as major nuclear armed states can always reverse or abandon the commitments made by the previous administrations. Is there any way to address this problem? And then a second, probably connected question, and I'm paraphrasing because it was a long question. NPT is an unequal treaty in terms of disarmament obligations and non-proliferation obligations. So should we invest our resources in it, or should we go for a new treaty banning nuclear weapons? And then the last question, I think it's a pretty interesting one. What effective initiatives can be carried out by non-nuclear weapon states for implementation of Article 6 of the NPT? So just to recap, what do you do with nuclear weapon states backtracking on their obligations? NPT is an equal treaty. Should we even bother keeping it? And then what non-nuclear weapon states can do? And maybe we should start with Tong this time around. Tong, please. The floor is yours to any of those questions.
Sure. I think to abandon NPT and set up a new treaty would probably not be constructive. I definitely wouldn't think China would support such a move. The reality that there are nuclear-armed states, and they wouldn't give up their nuclear weapons in the near-term future, is going to, exist. Even a new treaty wouldn't resolve this inherent differential status in the international security system. So I think the better, we had better work under the current regime and find ways to accelerate the elimination of such differential status rather than find a new format. I don't think a format is a real challenge. The real challenge is how do we create a more conducive international security environment that current nuclear possessor states would gradually pursue nuclear reduction and eventual disarmament. And talking about that relates to the question about the role of non-nuclear weapon states. I think they could play a very important role by highlighting the importance of nuclear arms control in their interactions and diplomatic engagements with nuclear weapon states. So far, I don't think the issue of nuclear arms control is really prioritized in many non-nuclear weapon states' diplomatic relations with nuclear weapon states. Perhaps many non-nuclear weapon states still have not directly felt the consequences of the emergence of a nuclear arms race. But I think the reality is even a limited nuclear exchange among the major powers, such as in Europe or in across the Taiwan Strait, many non-nuclear weapon states nearby or even farther away from the location of the conflict would still be negatively affected, including negative impact on their public health and environmental integrity. I think there is opportunity that non-nuclear weapon states can make use of the result of the UN expert group on nuclear war effect to better establish and clarify responsibility for any country that starts a nuclear conflict that would bring negative impact for other countries not directly involved. I still think the nuclear major powers, they care a lot about the response of non-nuclear weapon states. Even when the major power competition intensifies, US, China, Russia, they still care, although to different degree. Their image in global South countries, in non-nuclear weapon states. So I think non-nuclear weapon states have a lot of leverage if they want to highlight the issue of nuclear arms control.
Thank you, Anton.
A couple of points. First, regarding the role of non-nuclear weapon states. Well, I think one of the challenge nowadays, who can deliver a message to President Trump that resumption of nuclear tests is against the interest of the United States, or at least US allies. And if, for example, King of Saudi Arabia or Prime Minister of Japan could do that, I think it would be excellent. And I think it could help a lot to preserve the global nuclear test moratoria, because my understanding, there are not many people in the close circle of US president who can persuade him, change his view on any issue, including this one. This is one. Second, of course, there are different categories of non-nuclear weapon states, and there are non-nuclear weapon states which are so-called umbrella states, which are dependent on US nuclear weapons, and they should think how they will provide their security themselves, or with no reliance on foreign nuclear weapons, because I think it's unfair to some extent when the same country criticize nuclear weapon states for the lack in the field of nuclear disarmament and rely on nuclear weapons of other countries again at the same time. This is a couple of examples. With regard the NPT, whether there is a better alternative, well, I'm not sure that there is any. We should be also clear that NPT, it's not perfect, but we don't have a better alternative nowadays. And we should be also clear, when in the past we faced proliferation crises, all of them were resolved, or we tried to resolve them based on the NPT. And including, by the way, the JCPOA, it was based on NPT. So I think what is also important to keep in mind that the treaty has not changed since it was open for signature in 1968, which means that if someone interprets that as unequal, this is their right. But what is important, that no single word was changed in the treaty since it was adopted years ago. Probably the only important development since then was indefinite extension in 1995. What is important, as I mentioned, I would like to emphasize that again, to strengthen the dialogue between the nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states on multiple issues, including on proliferation risk, which we face, I think, more and more nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. Alex, please.
Yeah, I think agree with a lot of what's been said. I think there is no, and I said this in my opening remarks, there's no shortcut to the end. There, I could see a ban coming as the last step in a world without nuclear weapons. But again, that world is not this world without nuclear weapons. It's a fundamentally changed world where we figured out how to manage stability without nuclear weapons, and that's something at my place at the bulletin really would like to see people talking more about. How would we do security in a different world? Because for better or for worse, we've been sort of underpinning global security with deterrence. I don't think that's a forever solution because, quite frankly, the law of odds are not in our favor in terms of eventually a nuclear weapon being used. It's clear that already the majority of countries on this planet, are in favor of a world without nuclear weapons. Most, the majority of countries have acceded to the TPNW. But for most of those countries, that's the third iteration of that commitment, both through the TPNW, but also through the NPT and to several regional nuclear weapons free zone treaties. So it's clear that there is that interest there, but the majority of humans on this planet live in a country that has nuclear weapons or is covered by a nuclear umbrella. In assessing their security needs, these countries have decided that they see the need for deterrence that nuclear weapon in theory provides, and for some, they even see the need for more nuclear weapons. So the keys to moving forward really are knowing whether the latter group of countries remains committed to the ultimate goal of a world without nuclear weapons. And then if every country is actually willing to do the difficult work to reach that goal. I think countries that do not believe that the end goal should be a new world without nuclear weapons, should make that case out loud in public without euphemisms. But those who support disarmament, but are not willing to take on the potential political or economic burdens, that will likely accompany that pursuit, they should be truthful about their level of commitment. And it is with overt and abject honesty that I think we at least level set and understand how we're, dealing with the contours and the nature of this debate and prepare accordingly. Um, Again, I am an optimist. I do think that we are capable of figuring out a way forward, but it won't be easy, and it won't be as simply as saying we'll just ban them. There are just so many steps in the way, and you're asking countries that don't trust each other to trust each other. That's just going to take time. We have to build towards that trust. In terms of what non-nuclear weapon states can do, help create the pressure. It's sort of I have briefed countries on things like the Chinese nuclear buildup and received, countries that were very pro and publicly actively pushing for disarmament sort of shrug in the face of a briefing about the Chinese nuclear buildup. To me, that indicates they are weighing their views on disarmament against their relationship with China. Uh, that's sort of a problem. You either are for disarmament and everything that entails, or you aren't. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done. Really assessing how much burden a country is willing to take on to push for disarmament, but also do things like make sure the NPT stays intact. I agree with Anton. It is an imperfect treaty, but it's honestly the best thing we've got going on right now. Countries, nuclear weapon states continue to say that they are committed to it. It is a tool that we have used to great effect over the years. It is not a tool that we can afford to lose. So let's focus there on strengthening what we have, and then, again, think about what we might be able to do. I'm not averse to trying things simply because we're afraid it will be worse. I don't really think that we're on a trajectory that is a good one for us. So, the idea that we're protecting something, I think, has to be, assessed in the nature of how many things are going on wrong right now, and we have to be brave in sort of assessing where we might want to go while not wrecking what we have left.
Thank you, Alex. So we have 15 minutes left. I think I'll go for the three last questions. Apologies to anybody else who we did not have time to answer their questions. So I have one question specifically aimed at Tong, which reads as follows. Some states encourage China to participate in arms control. What does China think about this terminology? How does China understand arms control? Does it understand the same way as Russia and the United States? Another question is, building on the momentum of the newly adopted UNGA resolution on a group of scientific and technical experts, how do you envision verification playing a role as an instrument in Article 6 implementation? And the last, just combining two questions. So with everything going on, do you see there any chance that any risk reduction measures could be advanced before the 2026 review conference? And in similar vein, is anything like beyond traditional disarmament measures, beyond treaties and agreements, be achieved before 2026? Yeah, I don't know. We can start with Anton. You haven't gone first. So just to repeat, yeah, the first question is to Tong about China and arms control, the second about verification and the Article 6, and the last one, are there any chances to have anything before the 2026 REFCON? Please, Anton.
I think I will cover the last one. I wish to be optimistic on the new risk reduction measures before NPT REFCON, but I think we should be realistic. In the current circumstances, at best, I think we should try to preserve what we have. And here I should mention, we can, of course, speak a lot about the fact that arms control architecture was also almost dismantled during the last few decades. But still, for example, we have enforced Russia-US, Soviet-US agreement on hotlines, which during the recent years proved to be quite efficient and effective. As I understand, during the recent crises, a few channels for a quick and urgent communication were used by our two countries. So I think it could be example for others, because as I understand, for example, in the case of India-Pakistan crisis, hotlines did not work, and two countries were trying to find other ways to communicate to each other. The same true with regard to Korean Peninsula, for example. So again, I think we should try to be realistic what could be done before the next NPT review conference. At the same time, I think creative ideas, especially from scholars or very experienced retired people, could be submitted as a menu to officials. And again, ideally, if officials from the major stakeholder countries are able to get together before NPT review conference and try to discuss a potential language on the most complicated issues of upcoming conference, I think it would be good. It does not mean that just a few countries should pre-negotiate the language of the draft final document. The idea just to try to find a common ground on the most complicated issues in advance and later submitted those ideas to, of course, to all member states, which will be in New York next April and May. Thank you.
Thank you, Tong.
Thank you for the question on China's understanding of the definition or terminology of arms control. I think in practice, China considers arms control in a very comprehensive way. It counts, numerical and legally binding treaties. It also counts, behavioral arms control, including confidence building measures about how a country seeks to use its nuclear weapons. In practice, I think China has demonstrated a lot of flexibility. It sometimes promotes legally binding instruments, but other times it is open to discussing softer laws, normative rules, and institutions. At least the government continues to express interest in discussing nuclear risk reduction or strategic risk reduction. a good area for future engagement with China, especially when it comes to risks associated with emerging military technologies. On arms control verification, there is a lot of information showing that China is continuing to promote arms control verification research and technology. The Chinese Academy of Engineering and Physics, the Chinese equivalent of American nuclear labs, continues to provide significant funding for researchers to explore arms control verification methods, technologies, and instruments. The thing is, given the perceived political sensitivity, it's hard for researchers and experts from the Chinese Academy of Engineering and Physics to conduct exchanges with their international counterparts. They cannot travel internationally. So maybe some high-level political discussion can lead to less restrictive rules that would enable deeper exchanges on this topic, a topic that China has been doing a lot of work. Lastly, on near-term risk reduction measure, I would promote the measure for all nuclear weapon states to formally state the lack of plan to resume full-on nuclear explosive testing. That could address an urgent international concern.
Thank you, Tonkin. Alex, please.
Yeah, I would definitely support the idea of clarification from this administration on what they meant, and did note President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia mentioning that they were open to a discussion about U.S. concerns about testing. Would welcome that from the Chinese as well, and I think there's a lot of scientific exploration that could be done of how we might manage the problem of messing around at the margins when it comes to testing. Certainly, it's in no one's interest to have a full-scale return to explosive nuclear testing. So, I think that is something that the recognized nuclear weapon states, but particularly the U.S., Russia, and China, could do today if they wanted to, is commit to that kind of dialogue and commit to the moratorium on explosive nuclear testing. Progress is possible. Of course it is. Is it probable? Unclear. I think, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, I think people are waiting to see what the Trump administration will do in terms of responding to the Russian proposal of extending New START central limits. I hope that grows into something more. It really is unacceptable that neither side has moved to start a dialogue on what comes after New START. And I think, going back to what nuclear weapon states can do, saying out loud that it's unacceptable or behind closed doors, but saying to the United States and Russia that there is an expectation and actually an obligation for those two countries to be talking, I think would be helpful. In terms of multilateral work, it'd be interesting to see what the UK, I think who is the current chair of the P5 process, has planned in terms of engagement. I think that's the kind of thing that could be asked by other states parties to the treaty is what can NPT states parties expect to see in terms of meetings of the P5 before the end of April. It's a very, very legitimate and important question, I think. And there's just loads to do in that forum. We spent years talking about possible things that we could do together, simply a matter of choosing to do them. And on verification, that's a key. We're not going to figure out how to reduce numbers to lower levels until we figure out things like warhead verification. And the likelihood of us figuring that out is greatly increased the more scientists, academics, governments that are involved in thinking through those problems. So it couldn't be more supportive of that scientific endeavor. And I think, sometimes when all else fails, science cooperation has brought us out of particular tricky issues, and the case in point being the joint verification experiments in the 1980s that helped us figure out how to implement the threshold test ban treaty. So we know it can work when you leave the nerds to figure something out. They generally can figure things out and want to and are motivated to. Sometimes it seems it's the diplomats who are hesitant to find those points of cooperation and collaboration, and that really needs to change. But overall, I think this is going to be what we respectively as countries around the world make of it. I will say I forgot to answer the question earlier about possible political changes in countries and the back and forth, the whiplash between administrations. How do we manage that in terms of progress on arms control? Uh, the fact of the matter is democracies, are democracies, and they do change leadership, and they can change perspective. I think it's probably incumbent on all of us to make clear that nuclear threats don't care about your political affiliation. They will affect us all equally. And that no matter who is in party in any country at any given time, there is an interest and a deep security interest in trying to maintain strategic stability, in trying to build new arms control structures to provide that stability, and eventually, the work to eliminate the nuclear threat once and for all should be of interest to any political party. But that starts with a broader public awareness and broader public pressure to ask what countries are doing, to ask what our respective leaders are doing to manage these problems. And that's really where we need, and what we try to do at the Bulletin is bring more people into the conversation, and hopefully that will motivate them into increased civic action on these issues.
And Alex, and I think with this, I would just like to give all of the panelists like 1 minute to provide any concluding remarks that they would like to make. And Diarmo, feel free to join us in this exercise as well. And maybe to help you, to focus you, I have a last question from myself. If you woke up in late May next year and I told you we got a consensus final document of the 2026 RevCon, what would you have guessed your country was and was not doing to have achieved this result? And you can answer this question in any way you like, or maybe not answer at all. And we can start with Dong.
I think China would raise very hard issues during the process of RevCon, but would eventually stay out of the way for consensus document.
Okay, Anton.
I think after two RevCons with no final document, I hope all of the nuclear weapon states should be interested finally to change this trend. And in this context, I do believe that Russian delegation will work effectively to make it happen if other parties will be ready for that. Again, in the past, it's unfortunate that NPT, non-proliferation regime, was used as an instrument. If all major parties will be interested to reach an agreement, a very short final document, I think it could be done. It's very difficult, it's complicated. Sometimes it looks impossible, but I think it's doable. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I agree with both those statements. We need the NPT. We absolutely need it for global security. Is there more that needs to be done? Is there more that needs to be done to implement the obligations and agreements and understandings that were leveled when we had the indefinite extension of the treaty? Absolutely. Are we able to achieve that in late April, early May? Likely not. So let's temper our expectations and focus on what the core goal is making sure that everyone walking out of that conference in May understands that the NPT is necessary for our security, is worth strengthening and preserving, and that every country that is a party to it is committed to all parts of the treaty, all tenets of the treaty. And the U.S. part, I expect that we will probably see, a full team by late April, early May. So the U.S. delegation hopefully will be more active, more interactive with other NPT states parties, and hopefully working directly with the Russians and the Chinese, along with the French and the Brits, to make sure that we are acknowledging the slow pace of disarmament and talking about how we're going to manage that. And just sort of being clear about the obstacles that are in the way, but also clear about our intent to improve things in the future and to keep working the problems. I hope that is what the U.S. will say, but honestly, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because we have yet to see a fleshed out nuclear strategy, which I hope will be coming in the coming days in the national defense strategy, and then hopefully more sort of public pronouncements about where the U.S. wants to go in terms of nuclear policy.
Sorry, Jarmo, would you close us off?
Thank you very much. I mean, this was a wonderful panel and a wonderful conversation. Not very much to add, just two observations. First, on the review conference, it is possible to agree on an outcome in New York in May. We cannot keep our expectation very high anyway. I mean, it's not going to be very ambitious if there's going to be an agreement. Most of the elements, all of the elements, could be found already in the draft outcome document from 2022 and from the chair's working papers from each and every three PrepComs. There are the language, there are the issues which need to be covered. It's a diplomatic exercise to find common language. Concerning the future of our arms control, one of the challenges which was very clear also today is that big countries find it difficult to find the ways to speak to each other. And one of the issues is certainly that there's not enough political will to do that. We need to have the engagement from the highest level of political hierarchy in order to actually proceed with anything in the arms control. Certain things which were mentioned today, Track 2 talks, scientific work would help, but the political leadership certainly is the key to any success. Thank you.
Thank you, Jarmo. And with this, it remains me to thank our panelists and speakers for joining us, Alex, Anton, Tong, Jarmo. Thanks to all of you joining us online, giving us your time and your participation in discussion. I would also like to thank my colleagues at UNIDIR, Sarah Rush, Louise, and Nick, for helping make these things work, and UNODA colleague for input to this event. This event and this series are being funded through support from the government of Switzerland, so thank you to Switzerland for their support. And the next event in the series will focus on transparency and accountability in the NPT review process. It will take place at the end of January, so keep an eye on our social media for the registration link coming soon. And before closing, I would encourage you all to complete our online feedback form. It takes only a couple of minutes and it's anonymous, and it's really important for us to think what you think about it, what can we do better maybe. With this, have a good afternoon, a good day or night, depending on where this finds you online, and thank you.